There is a lot of misconceptions when it comes to hospice. I will say that the biggest one is probably patients and families thinking that it's giving up.
My father was on hospice and my mother was also on hospice. And so I had two different experiences. And some people are more comfortable with the conversations around death, where other people, this might be their first time, either their first death that they're dealing with or the first time that they're losing somebody that's extremely close to them.
We had a family member that died unexpectedly, and that triggered for me to have that conversation with my parents. And I'm using it as an example so that other families can do the same.
And some people don't know what to expect. You know, they say, well, I'm healthy now. How can I know what I'm going to need when that time comes? How do you prepare for the hardest goodbye? Facing hospice with a loved one is one of the hardest moments. Today, we're going to break down what families need to know so that they can know what to handle before they're in the middle of it. And I've got Yazmin Williams, the administrator at Silverado Hospice, with us today. And so thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. It's definitely a pleasure. And, you know, hospice is a challenging conversation.
It definitely is.
I'm curious, what are some of the misconceptions around hospice?
Thank you so much for asking that. There is a lot of misconceptions when it comes to hospice. I will say that the biggest one is probably patients and families thinking that it's giving up. And I personally don't think that that's the case. I think it's more of changing focus from doing curative measures to really having hospice and the route of hospice provide comfort care and adding quality of life to the patient.
So my father was on hospice and my mother was also on hospice. And so I had two different experiences. And some people are more comfortable with the conversations around death, where other people, this might be their first time, either their first death that they're dealing with or the first time that they're losing somebody that's extremely close to them. So how do you help the families have those conversations for the family member to go on hospice or, you know, start the process?
Absolutely. And I always think that it's really setting up the environment for the families to have that with their loved one. I would say, using an example, like most recently I had I actually had that conversation with my own parents, and we had a family member that died unexpectedly, and that triggered for me to have that conversation with my parents. And I'm using it as an example so that other families can do the same. But not having or being prepared, I think, is really important, and being able to use those triggers or those examples, I think, goes a long way. And I used it to be able to talk to my parents of, like, this is what happened and it was unexpected. And I think I just want to know what your wishes are so that I can honor them. And we were able to open a conversation that I think a lot of people do not feel comfortable with having.
And so did you have the conversation immediately following the death of the other loved one, or did you wait a couple of weeks? Like, how do you know when to approach that conversation?
I waited a couple weeks, but I did feel like it was the right moment for me to have that conversation.
And sometimes there's never the right moment.
Right.
It's just, you know, having the conversation and approaching your loved one and having that conversation about what their wishes are. Because I know from experience, if you don't know what your loved one's wishes are and it's put on you to make the decisions, you're caught like second guessing yourself.
Right.
So with my father, I knew exactly what he wanted and he was cognitive the whole time. And so I was able to ask him at each stage, you know, Dad, are you ready to take the morphine? You know, because I felt guilty that I was starting this process. But I also knew that it was giving him, it was relieving him of his pain, and it was helping him to breathe better, which he needed at that time. And I was grateful to be able to have those conversations with him. Or with my mother, it wasn't the same. And so, and some people don't know what to expect. You know, they say, well, I'm healthy now. How can I know what I'm going to need when that time comes? So do you have any advice around that?
I always say, always hope for the best, but prepare for the worst, because life is just so unexpected. And I think that that's probably one of the biggest things that I've learned from working in the hospice industry is that life is not guaranteed, and we don't know what tomorrow's going to bring. So
Right.
I think that, to your point, I don't think that there's the right moment, but I think that there's always a time for us to be able to have those conversations and not feel afraid to have them.
Thank you. Was there a moment or an experience that you had that you decided that you wanted to work in hospice?
I was actually working in skilled nursing at that time. And I had a patient who um, had a very bad death,
Mm-hmm.
and I didn't understand. They were full code, and they had done the whole CPR, and it was just very traumatic.
Mm-hmm.
And then talking to my supervisor, who encouraged me and started my career in hospice, um, understanding the philosophy of hospice and how each discipline plays a major role in what they do to
Mm-hmm.
provide that comfort, and that could have changed that specific case
Mm.
really changed my mind. And actually, that's one of the reasons why I started my career with hospice.
Oh, I love that. I'm glad that you had somebody that was guiding you into this field. Everybody that I've ever met that has worked for a hospice company, they're angels. They're just
Yes.
like the sweetest people. Um, what is so let me ask you, because you were talking about the different disciplines. What is the difference between hospice and palliative care?
I would say that the biggest difference is the services that are provided for one or the other, and it
Mm-hmm.
really depends on where the patient is. I always say, depending on what the patient's goals and expectations are, that's
Mm-hmm.
probably going to determine what service is going to be the best. If a patient is still wanting to do, let's say, cancer patient is still wanting to do chemo or radiation, palliative would be the best route, just because it's more focused on really managing any symptoms. And sometimes with those treatments, it can trigger or cause a lot of symptoms after each treatment.
So is it more pain management then?
It is. So it's
Okay.
based on symptom management. So whether it's pain, nausea, vomiting, anything that is symptom related, palliative will assess and manage. On the other side, when it comes to hospice, it's more about really focusing on allowing the disease to take its natural course.
Mm-hmm.
And you're really focusing on comfort measures and allowing for, again, the disease to take its natural course.
Okay. And does somebody have to have a do not resuscitate, a DNR on their file in order to be on hospice?
They do not. And I think that's one of my biggest pet peeve. Although we would love for every patient that comes onto hospice to be a DNR, I really do think that it's the due diligence of a
Mm-hmm.
hospice to really educate the families. It's already hard enough to make those decisions and making the decision of going with hospice, that I
Mm-hmm.
feel like it really is our job to guide and help educate the families.
Hi, friends. I want to pause here and speak directly to the sons and daughters listening. If your parents' health is changing, if the house isn't supporting them the way it used to, or if you're stepping into decisions you never expected to be making, you may be trying to figure out who should be helping you right now. Well, there's a lot of voices in this space. The key is knowing which one actually fits your situation, and that's where a discovery call can help. During that conversation, we look at your specific circumstances and get clear on what needs attention first. It's about helping you identify the right next step and the right professional for your situation, so you're not guessing or reacting or carrying the weight by yourself. If having that kind of clarity would steady things for you, you'll find the booking link in the show notes. Now, back to the episode.
How does someone qualify for hospice? What are the requirements?
So the requirements would be to have a prognosis of 6 months or less.
Okay.
And although that's the expectancy, it doesn't necessarily mean that that would be the case. There are really good outcomes if a patient is referred to hospice in a timely manner. And actually, if they're referred at an early stage, the outcome is better.
So somebody can actually go off of hospice.
Yes, they can graduate
Okay.
off of hospice.
Okay. And if they've been on hospice once and they graduate off of hospice, can they get back on hospice?
Yes, they can.
Okay. And then as far as their relationships with their doctors, are they able to maintain those relationships, or do they go with the hospice doctor on staff?
So if the patient chooses to have the attending or their currently primary care physician be the attending, they are more than welcome to have it. If, let's say, the primary care physician doesn't feel comfortable, and there are those circumstances where that could happen, we do have our medical director or the doctor or the hospice doctor that will take over and manage the care.
Okay. And then the families, what kind of support is available to them?
So what is beautiful about hospice is that it's not just clinical. You also have a whole psychosocial support team, which includes the social worker, chaplain, and even some agencies provide music therapy. And what's great about that is that you have a social worker that's going to be able to help with any psychosocial needs and be able to provide any counseling needs if there's any. And they're not only there for the patient, but also for the family as well.
Okay, I love that. And then how long is care provided after the person has passed?
They usually do about a year of bereavement support, and then they do have other groups that they can provide if they need additional support, where they have bereavement support groups for the families if that's what's needed.
Okay. And as far as hospice goes, I remember my father, when he did go on hospice, he asked us to use the word palliative care around the house. He knew he was on hospice, but we all had to use the word palliative care. And that was just more palliative to hear and to handle. And so you talked about music. And I know that not all hospice companies offer that. And for my father, I initially was interviewing different hospice companies. So most people don't know that you can interview companies. And often someone might just choose the company that was recommended to them by the case manager at the hospital, for example.
Yeah.
But I think it's important that people know that they have choices. And we first went with one hospice company, and I wasn't happy with the communication. So the person that we interviewed was their customer service, or I don't even know what the title was, their representative from the company I met with, and I loved them. And the experience didn't match. And so I wasn't happy with the communication. And so I went and interviewed another company, which is how I met you. And everyone was so wonderful. And music therapy was part of that service. So tell me a little bit more about music therapy.
Oh my God, it's probably one of my favorite disciplines. And I will say that I was probably part of that population that just thought music therapy was someone that goes and entertains until I actually was able to witness what it truly does. The first experience I had with music therapy was having my music therapist and I go visit a patient that was a dementia patient, bedbound, nonverbal. She had actually had a conversation with her loved one about just her history and what she liked to do. And we came to find out that she was part of her church choir. And her favorite song was Amazing Grace, and she was a lead singer at her church choir. So when my music therapist starts to sing the song, you start seeing this patient who's bedbound, nonverbal, start wanting to mumble the words to Amazing Grace. And I just realized the difference that truly makes for patients, and not just dementia patients. There's so many other stories, but when we've done honoring of veterans and we have our music therapists singing each branch song, and you have a dementia patient who just hears his branch song and wants to stand up and, is so proud that he served. And it just makes that big of a difference that I feel like music therapy in general is important.
I know around the United States that there are different areas where they offer hospice houses. And I don't know what's offered in San Diego. I know that you can get hospice in your home and you can get hospice care in a hospital. Are those the only two available treatments?
No. So there are in the Midwest. I know hospice houses are actually big in the Midwest. And I would say that's something I envy about the Midwest. California hasn't just been too developed, I think, when it comes to the hospice houses. And I really feel like that's something that I want to be proactive in ensuring. But no. So hospice goes wherever the patient calls home. So whether that's the hospital, skilled nursing, assisted living, board and care, home, hospices will go anywhere where they call home.
And so when somebody is in skilled nursing, then who administers the medications?
So we work hand in hand with the facility and the facility staff. So they're responsible for the overall management of the actual day-to-day care, while we're responsible for maintaining and making sure that the patient is comfortable.
What about in the home?
We would educate whoever is considered the caregiver. So whether it's the patient's family or they actually have a private caregiver, then that's who we educate in order for us to be able to guide them through the whole process.
Sure. And how do people pay for this?
It's covered through Medicare for the most part. If the patient is 65 and older, Medi-Cal will cover as well in commercial insurances. And it's
Okay.
not just for geriatrics. I know hospice is also for peds as well.
Okay. And so for peds, then it's either covered through your insurance, and if you don't have insurance, then how does that get covered?
So it would be a private pay, but so
Okay.
pediatric is a whole different breed compared to geriatric, but and there's a big difference. So with geriatrics, you're focusing more on comfort measures, where with pediatric, it's concurrent care, and you actually can have the mother's insurance cover for the pediatric patient.
Okay, that's good to know. I have no experience with pediatrics and hospice, and again, angels that work in hospice. So thank you. The how does hospice handle the dynamics with families?
And I'll say again, I think it's just not just having the clinical team, is having the psychosocial support team. And although we understand that families have dynamics, it is very patient-centered driven. And part of the social worker's job, or part of, their job, is to make sure that they're the mediator and that they can set up meetings and that they can talk to the patient and then honor patient wishes, and then also be part of the hopefully conflict solution. But we also know that we can't always solve everything.
Okay. And kind of tell me a little bit more. I know you mentioned it briefly, but tell me more about who makes up the hospice team.
So the hospice team is based out of the RN case manager, who is going to be the RN or the main person that's going to manage the care at home.
Okay.
And then the physician, who's going to be the hospice physician, as well as the home health aide. So if they need help with grooming or bathing, the home health aide will be involved. The social support team is consisted of a medical social worker and a chaplain as well. And then again, you have the music therapist as well.
And at what point should someone consider going on hospice?
I think when they're ready to really make that decision of, I am not giving up, but I'm just focusing or shifting over to want comfort measures, I think that's the time to really consider potentially having hospice.
Okay. What other services does hospice provide as far as equipment in the home?
So hospice, and all hospices should be providing this, is durable medical equipment. So whether it's a hospital bed, half rails, the overbed table.
The railings are really important.
Yes.
They're called railings or rails? Rails.
Rails.
Okay.
An overbed table, oxygen, anything that's needed, hospice is able to cover.
Yeah, my father had a hospice bed, and it was so helpful to have the bed that could lift and lower as needed, so I could help him get out of the bed. He had a wheelchair. The bathroom was so far away, and so just having that porta potty available closer to his bed and having somebody come in frequently and check on him was also very helpful. So I think it's important for people to know that you can have that equipment available to you in your home, so that you can move the person. Maybe there's an upstairs bedroom that's difficult, and maybe they're still mobile, and you want to have them on the first floor. So I had a friend who they turned their dining room, they removed the furniture, and then they had her hospice bed there, so that it was easier for them to manage it.
And hospices will always accommodate that as well.
Yeah, no, they're wonderful. When a family is considering hospice and they're interviewing companies, what questions do you think that they should ask when determining who they're going to hire?
Oh, that's a great question, because I always want to make sure that families understand that there are options, and that it's important to ask, I would say, the following questions. What is the nurse ratio to nurse to patient? And the reason why that's an important question is because you really want to make sure that the RN case manager is having enough time with your loved one. If they're carrying a caseload about 20, it's not going to be manageable for them. to be able to really provide that one-on-one and take their time and be there where their loved one. So I think that's an important question. I would also say after hours is another great question, making sure that you're aware of how their after hours program works, because there are some hospices that say they have after hours, but they have nursing going from one side to another. And you just want to make sure, because I always say that nothing happens Monday through Friday, 8 to 5, and it's always after hours where you need someone or you need hospice. And I think that that's something important. And then the third question I would say is the levels of care. There are different levels of care when it comes to hospice, and I would say that the biggest one is, do they have continuous care or crisis care? Are they able to provide respite care? And, general inpatient level of care is a different type of level of care, but those two level of cares are very important.
So tell me more about respite care, because that's for the caregiver.
That's correct. So a lot of the times, I'm going to use myself as an example. If I was taking care of my loved one and I just started to have caregiver burnout, which is a real thing.
Yeah, very common.
The hospice would provide a 5-day respite at a facility. Usually it's a skilled nursing facility. And they would send my loved one there for 5 days to be able to alleviate or give me a break. And that's something that I always encourage families to ask.
And not all hospice companies offer respite care?
They should. So it's an important question just to ask.
Okay, interesting. And then what was the first one that you had suggested?
And then it's crisis care, continuous care.
And what is that?
And so that's if, in case, let's say a patient is at home and the patient's symptoms are not being managed with the current medication and there's just a lot going on, the hospice can send out a nurse to go and assess and see if that level of care is appropriate. Although Medicare requires 8 hours at a minimum, it could go from 8 hours to 24 hours to have a nurse at bedside. I do tell families that it's not long-term. As soon as the patient is managed and is as comfortable, they will discontinue that level of care and put him back on a routine.
Okay. So it's not always at the end of life.
It's not. It just really depends, because every patient and it's case by case, and everybody has a different experience.
Okay. I know with my father, I called at 5 a.m. in the morning, and they were walking me through the process, and I knew in my gut I needed more support.
Yeah.
So I asked for it, and then they provided it. And it made me wonder how many people are at home with their loved one without support at the final moment. And so I think what I want people to know is to, if you have a need, ask for what you need. Because having that support when my father actually passed in that moment, hospice was still there in the home, and it made all the difference in the world.
Absolutely. And I would say probably also asking about their volunteer program. If let's say their loved one isn't appropriate for crisis care. There are some hospices that have a volunteer program where they have volunteers that will do vigils, and and they can be at bedside if that's needed. I don't like to overpromise and not and underdeliver, but I think that those options are there for a lot of the hospices out in the community.
And in closing, tell me what you would like people to understand about the value of hospice.
I would say to not shy away from it and not be scared, although it's I think within our community, there's a lack of resources and education when it comes to hospice and that big fear of death. I think that there's always beauty to everything. And I think with hospice, it's more of understanding truly what they're there to do, the disciplines, and just being able to talk about some of the stories that I have. And I'll close it with this story that I had. I had a patient who had pancreatic cancer, who I had bonded with because his wife and him were into cars, and my husband and I are in, through love the same. We had the same hobbies. And his last wish was to be able to rebuild an engine. So me thinking outside the box, I decided to build this STEM engine, and he wasn't able to get out of bed, but we were able to build it together. And it's that story and that meaning. And I think it's the ability to be able to share those stories, that it's not always scary, because there is beauty to some of the darkest things that we go through.
Well, he was very lucky to have you at his bedside and for you to be thinking outside of the box. So,
Thank you so much.
yeah, thank you for being our guest today.
Thank you for having me.
That's a wrap for One Place Aging, your source for answers. Please tune in next week when we interview another specialist in serving seniors, and we look forward to seeing you then.